A mid-size regional amusement park in the American South closed its gates in the winter of 2018 after 41 years of operation, not because anyone stopped wanting to ride roller coasters, but because the park owed more money on its most popular attraction than the entire property was worth. That coaster cost $11 million to build, generated lines around the block every summer, and still wasn't enough. The amusement park business is one of the most capital-intensive leisure industries ever constructed, and the gap between what it looks like from the front gate and what it actually costs to run it is bigger than most people will ever imagine. Start with a single roller coaster. A mid-range steel thrill coaster, the kind you'd find anchoring a regional park's lineup, runs anywhere from $5 million to $20 million to design, manufacture, and install, depending on the complexity of the layout and the number of inversions. None of that includes site preparation, grading the terrain, pouring the concrete footings, running the electrical infrastructure out to the ride's control system, or the landscaping that gets done afterward to make the whole thing look like it wasn't a construction site 3 months ago. Add 15 to 30% on top of the hardware cost, and you're closer to the real number. The most expensive coasters in operation today cost $50 million at construction. Hagrid's Magical Creatures motorbike adventure at Universal Orlando reportedly cost around $300 million, though that figure includes its elaborate theming and indoor queue system. At Dollywood, the Big Bear mountain coaster that opened in May of 2023 was built for $25 million and was described at the time as the largest single attraction investment in that park's history. $25 million for one ride. And the moment it opens, the depreciation clock starts. A coaster with a lifespan of 30 to 40 years sounds durable until you account for what those years actually cost. Industry guidelines suggest budgeting 3 to 8% of a ride's initial cost annually for maintenance, parts replacement, and inspections. For a $10 million coaster, the annual maintenance tab runs somewhere between $300,000 and $800,000 per year, every year, just to keep that one ride running safely. Now zoom out and imagine you don't own one roller coaster. You own a full park. The land alone for a destination amusement park runs into the tens of millions before a single shovel touches the ground. A regional park sitting on 100 to 300 acres in a mid-market area might acquire that land for anywhere from $8 to $30 million depending on location, proximity to highway access, and whether the site already has utility infrastructure. Urban adjacent land costs exponentially more. Six Flags built parks on the suburban fringe of major cities precisely because that was where land was affordable enough and population density was still high enough to justify the investment. Beyond the land, you need infrastructure that has nothing to do with rides. Parking for 10,000 cars on a peak summer Saturday requires an entire engineered lot with drainage systems, lighting, paving, and traffic flow management. Building that lot for a medium-sized park runs $4 to $8 million. Then come the walkways, the plumbing, the electrical grid that has to carry enough power to run dozens of motors simultaneously, the administration buildings, the maintenance facilities, the first aid stations, the ticketing booths, and the storm drainage system. Before a guest walks through the front gate and rides a single thing, a regional park of moderate scale has committed somewhere between $50 million and $250 million in capital. The low end of that range is a very lean operation, used equipment, minimal theming, no major coaster, and a location where land was cheap. The high end is still nowhere near what it costs to open a destination resort. Disney's Animal Kingdom opened in 1998 at a reported cost of $800 million, and that figure has been adjusted upward by subsequent analysts accounting for deferred costs. Most new parks being built today never attempt to compete at that level. Most operators phase the development open with a core set of attractions and add a headline ride every 2 to 3 years to give the local market a reason to come back. Smart in theory, but the debt doesn't get smaller, it compounds. Each new ride is either financed through operating cash flow, debt, or equity from investors who expect returns in a business that's fundamentally seasonal. Which brings up the single most underappreciated structural problem in the amusement park business. These parks, most of them, make almost all of their money in roughly 120 days. Parks in northern climates stretch their season from Memorial Day to Labor Day with some Halloween and holiday extensions. Spread a full year of fixed costs across 4 months of revenue, and the math looks very different from what the summer crowds suggest. Insurance is a good place to understand what that pressure actually feels like. Amusement parks sit in one of the most liability-exposed categories of any business in the United States. A single serious injury incident, even one where the park is ultimately found not liable, will trigger claim activity that can spike annual premiums for years. Mid to large regional parks carry comprehensive liability programs that run from $50,000 to $500,000 per year, and some operators in markets with aggressive plaintiffs' law firms pay well above that. The premium is owed on January 1st whether the park opens its gates in May. Ride inspections add another cost layer that most people outside the industry don't see. Every jurisdiction is different, but parks in regulated states are required to have rides inspected by certified third-party engineers before opening each season, and in some cases before every operating day for certain classifications of ride. A single third-party annual inspection for one major coaster can run from $10,000 to $40,000 depending on the state and the complexity of the ride. A park with 30 to 50 attractions is running those costs across its entire fleet simultaneously. The documentation requirement alone generates thousands of pages of maintenance logs, repair records, torque specifications, and inspection certificates that have to be maintained, stored, and produced on demand by regulators. If that paperwork isn't in order, the park doesn't open, not that ride. Not any of them. The regulator can pull an operating permit for a single documentation gap, and in peak season, a closed ride costs the park real money in the form of disappointed guests who drove 40 minutes to get on that specific attraction. Labor is where the real weight lives. Industry data consistently shows that staffing and payroll account for 25 to 45% of operating costs for amusement parks, and that's before you account for the seasonal distortion. A regional park operating from May through October needs to staff anywhere from 500 to several thousand positions depending on size. The majority of those workers are seasonal part-time, often under 25 years old, earning entry-level wages and typically churning at high rates from week to week. Training new staff isn't a one-day orientation. Before a ride operator can be put on a coaster unsupervised, they go through certification on that specific ride safety procedures, restraint checks, emergency protocols, and dispatch sequences. The training takes time and money, and if the operator quits after 3 weeks, the park absorbs the cost and starts over. The labor shortage pressure that hit virtually every service sector business after 2020 hit amusement parks particularly hard. Parks responded by raising wages, offering signing bonuses, and in some cases providing subsidized housing for seasonal staff who relocated to work at a destination resort. Those costs don't appear in the fantasy version of owning an amusement park. Every week from May through October, those costs appear in the payroll line without exception. Energy is the cost that never sleeps. A large theme park operates electrical systems comparable in scale to a small city. Roller coasters run high-power motors to drive lift chains and launch mechanisms. Water rides circulate millions of gallons through pump systems that run continuously. Refrigeration keeps the food operations cold across dozens of concession stands. Air conditioning and HVAC systems manage climate inside restaurants, shops, and ride queue buildings. LED lighting illuminates the entire property for evening operations, even on nights when attendance is thin. A mid to large regional park can spend between $2 and $6 million per year on energy alone, and that figure spikes during summer heat events when cooling systems work at maximum load precisely when the most guests are on property. Those capital investments still require money up front, and for a park already carrying significant debt from its last major ride addition, there's rarely a clean financial moment to make that shift. The money does come in. On a peak Saturday in July, the revenue flowing through a regional park's gates and concession stands is significant. General admission pricing for a mid-size regional park has climbed substantially over the past decade. Where a park might have charged $35 to $40 for a day ticket in the early 2000s, comparable parks today are charging between $60 and $90 at the gate, and some charge significantly more for premium dates. Cedar Fair's legacy parks, prior to their merger with Six Flags in 2024, reported average in-park per capita spending of $61.65 for full year 2022. That number includes admission, food, merchandise, and games, but it's an average across every guest who walked through the gates, including season pass holders who paid dramatically less per visit. Season passes are the mechanism that makes or breaks the attendance model. A park charging $80 at the gate for a single day might sell an annual season pass for $140. The guest wins on any season where they visit more than twice. The park wins because that upfront payment comes in during the off-season or early spring, providing cash flow precisely when the gates are closed and the bills are still arriving. The season pass, though, dilutes per visit spending. A season pass holder who knows they'll be back next month doesn't spend the same way at the food stand as someone who drove 2 hours and knows this is their one day at the park. Parks have addressed this tension through layered ancillary pricing, the fast pass system, which allows guests to bypass standard queues by paying an additional fee on top of their admission, has become one of the highest margin products in the amusement industry. Fast Lane and similar programs priced dynamically based on the day's anticipated attendance. A light Tuesday in June puts the Fast Pass somewhere in the $30 to $50 range per person. By a packed Saturday in July, that same product can retail for $150 to over $200 per person. The actual marginal cost to the park of providing Fast Lane access is close to zero. No additional ride cycles are created. No extra staff are hired. The system just routes paying guests past a different physical point in the queue. That's the definition of a high-margin product, an experience the park can sell repeatedly at negligible incremental cost. Food and beverage is the other engine. At established parks, food and beverage accounts for roughly 25 to 30% of total park revenue, and the gross margin on those sales is substantially higher than on admission. A bottle of water that costs a park 40 cents wholesale retails inside the gates for $5 to $7. A funnel cake made from ingredients costing under $1 sells for $11 to $15, depending on the market. A family of 4 spending a full day inside a park where outside food isn't permitted will spend somewhere between $80 and $160 on food and beverages without making any deliberate effort to splurge. Parks have engineered this carefully. The no outside food policy, the strategic spacing of concession stands so no guest walks more than 5 minutes to a food option, the placement of high-margin impulse items at ride exits and queue lines, all of it deliberate revenue architecture. Merchandise follows the same logic. A stuffed animal with a park logo costs $3 to manufacture at volume and sells for $28 to $40 at a Midway game booth or gift shop. Guests who've just had a great experience are in a spending state of mind, and the price resistance inside a park is lower than it would be in any other retail environment. Parking has quietly become a significant revenue line that operators now treat as a premium product rather than a utility. Where parking used to be a flat fee of $10 to $15 in the early 2000s, regional parks today commonly charge $25 to $40 for standard parking. Premium parking, positioned close to the front gate, runs $45 to $75 at many parks. A park day with 20,000 visitors arriving primarily in cars generates hundreds of thousands of dollars in parking revenue alone, with almost no variable cost attached. The capital was deployed when the lot was built. The asphalt doesn't cost more per car. So what does the math actually look like once all of this comes together? A well-run regional park with strong attendance, diversified revenue, and a decade of operating history might generate EBITDA margins in the range of 15 to 30%. Cedar Fair's peak performance in 2022 delivered $552 million in adjusted EBITDA against $1,820 million in revenue, 30.3% EBITDA. But Cedar Fair was operating at scale across dozens of parks with decades of debt management experience and a season pass base built over generations. The independent regional operator doesn't have those advantages. For a single park operation, EBITDA margins in the 10 to 15% range are more realistic once debt service, which the EBITDA number doesn't capture, gets factored in. A park that borrowed heavily to build its last major coaster is now making monthly debt payments regardless of whether it rained for 6 of the last 8 weekends. And rain is not a hypothetical risk. A rainy Memorial Day weekend, which is one of the highest revenue windows in the entire calendar year for most parks, can cost a regional operator $700,000 to over $1 million in lost admission and concession revenue over 3 days. That revenue doesn't come back. Revenue lost to a rainy weekend doesn't roll to the following one. The guests who stayed home mostly don't reschedule. Those guests just didn't come. Multiply that exposure across a full summer of weather variance, and you understand why most parks operate a working capital reserve large enough to absorb 2 to 3 bad weekends without missing payroll or an insurance payment. The parks that don't maintain that reserve are the ones that end up in distress. The historical data on park failures is sobering in a way that the summer crowds obscure entirely. A study examining North American theme park openings between 1955 and 2009 found that 31% of parks opened during that period had closed by the time the study concluded. The most common cause wasn't a catastrophic accident or a regulatory shutdown. The most common causes were financial debt they couldn't service, land that was worth more developed than operated, attendance that eroded when a larger competitor entered the region, or a single bad season that wiped out the working capital reserve and left them unable to fund the off-season maintenance cycle. The last cause is where small parks actually die. When a park can't fund its pre-season maintenance and inspection budget, it can't legally open. Closed gates generate nothing, the debt still compounds. At that point, the gate closes for what everyone initially calls a temporary pause, and what most of those parks call a permanent one within 18 months. Survivors in this industry tend to share a few structural traits. A deep local season pass base generates reliable off-season cash flow, the kind that keeps the bills paid in February when the gates are closed. They operate at a scale where overhead costs are spread across enough attractions that any single ride being down for maintenance doesn't tank the whole day's revenue. Land ownership matters more than it looks. Eliminating a lease obligation and providing an asset to borrow against when the next capital project needs funding gives a park structural stability that a leasehold operator simply doesn't have. They treat food, beverage, and premium add-ons as the actual profit center of the business, and they price admission at a level that drives volume toward those higher margin products, rather than trying to extract all of their profit at the gate. Consistent reinvestment is the other requirement they can't skip. The data from the industry is clear on this: parks that skip a major new attraction for more than 3 consecutive years see measurable attendance erosion. The novelty effect wears off. The local market feels like they've experienced everything on offer. Season pass renewals decline. When renewals decline, the off-season cash flow that funds pre-season operations declines with it, and the spiral that ends with a closed park begins. Owning an amusement park turns out to be the economics of a perpetual debt machine, constantly spending money you haven't earned yet in order to attract the crowds that will generate the money to pay for what you just spent. The front gate is what guests see. What's behind it is a capital machine that requires continuous feeding. On the night before Dollywood opened Big Bear Mountain to the public in May of 2023, the maintenance crew ran final checks on a coaster that had consumed $25 million and years of planning. The ride would carry its first paying guests the following morning, and the maintenance budget for that ride had already been written into the operating plan for the next 30 years. The thrills are real. The roller coaster works exactly as advertised. It's just that the business of making sure it does costs more, and stays more precarious than anyone standing in line on a July afternoon would ever guess.